to welcome everybody to our annual CEO Summit. Special welcome for those who have come from out of town. Quick show of hands who's come from out of town. Wow, incredible. So very special welcome to you, except for any Nationals fans. All right, Kate, you too. This is Texas. We like everybody.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to the vlog. I know we've been absent, but some people forget that we have businesses to run and we've been extremely busy. So our apologies, but we're back. Thanks to Korva also for sponsoring all the video material that we have. So huge shout out to those guys. So where are we at today? As you can see, we are at the Johnson Space Center here in Houston, Texas. And we are at the second annual Blue Bear Capital CEO Summit. Super excited to be here. Thanks to those guys for inviting us out. It's headed up by Ernst Sack and Tim Kopra. Tim was actually involved in the International Space Station for quite some time. He was an astronaut for many, many years. He was actually very highly regarded in the NASA community here. So we're currently going through some presentations of some of their portfolio companies that they invest in. It's very, very fascinating stuff so far. We still have a whole other section of that to go. We've got Lord John Browne. We've got a couple different panels speaking different topics, from oil and gas to renewables to the future, data digitalization, things like that. We're going to go inside the museum and get full access. We'll get some really cool shots in there, a full dinner, and just some good networking with good people. So thanks again for those guys for inviting us out. We're huge fans of theirs and support everything that they do. And so just glad to be here.
So taking a bit of a step back, you are having a pretty interesting career. I've had a lot of broad exposure to top decision makers around the globe, and are one yourself. As chairman and CEO of BP, as a member of the boards of Intel and Goldman Sachs, as a member of the House of Lords, as chairman of the Tate, as a member of the Crick Institute, the list goes on and on. One of the things you're most well known for is a speech you gave in 1997 in California, where you were the first big oil major executive to speak publicly about the risk of global warming and investment in renewable energy.
When I went to my board of directors at BP to talk to them about risks, real risks, where I said, I think if we're going to invest money, we could lose it all, but it's worth doing. We did two things which were very bad. We were wrong. One is we were stuck with an idea, which was a legacy idea, that we should be making solar panels. This was before China really decided to take off in this area. And secondly, we went into wind and picked the wrong technology. Other than that, everything was great. But it certainly taught us a lot and taught us how to think about energy on a wider scale by doing something. But rather more importantly, it began to give us what I really needed was a seat at the table to discuss with people who did not want hydrocarbon energy to grow, how the energy system of the world would begin to develop. And I thought that was a better position to have than have people in other rooms talking about the future of the company that I was running without my being there. When I made the speech, which put firm accountability for emissions of CO2 in the hands of the oil and gas business, and I said, here's the actions. I'm afraid I was excommunicated, as my colleague said, from the American Petroleum Institute. I hadn't realized I was a member of that church, but nonetheless I was excommunicated, and I feel good about that.
The world wants to know, who is your favorite Spice Girl?
Well, it has to be Victoria Beckham, doesn't it?
Cultural icon. There seems to be a corollary, potentially, a similarity between the world of the mid to late 90s, the emergence of renewables as a viable but deeply in the red on a unit economic or any real economic basis, to today as more and more people are seriously starting to talk about geoengineering. Direct air carbon capture, for example, potentially large-scale seasonal energy storage fits in that category, all the way to Dyson spheres. How do you feel about the physics and the engineering capability of those as solutions, and as a business person, would you invest in them now the way you would have pushed for renewables in '97?
It seems to me that the world goes through, in the energy business, goes through big changes once in a while. And the most recent ones in the last 20 years have really been the following. In the late 90s, the energy industry discovered how really to process seismic to reduce exploration risk and technological change, and they were able to do all that because suddenly the world changed when the Berlin Wall came down and the Iron Curtain collapsed. So we had a change in technology and a change in politics. Now we come to today, where we see changes in the way in which we think about energy systems and what we can do to reduce emissions of CO2 and methane from those systems. And what is happening politically is that I think most populations, certainly started in Europe and spreading to the US and elsewhere, people are observing the weather and relating that to climate. That may well be the case, but they're worrying about that, they're seeing an ever-present danger, and they want more things done. And younger generations want even more things done because they're educated about what might happen if we play this game out to its conclusion. So on the technology side, the engineered products, there of course is an explosion of them. And that's exactly what there should be. And some will die, some will win. And I'm very happy to see that. The biggest thing we've, I think, got to shift to is this. It seems to me that it's unlikely that we can reduce global consumption of hydrocarbons to much below today's level. I don't think it'll grow much from today's level either for the next 20 years. So in that case, we have to simply decarbonize the hydrocarbons. And there are definitely engineering processes to do that. They just need to be now tuned, really tuned up, and really deployed with scale, because the more scale, as you all know, the cheaper the units become. We can develop lots of other things to do with energy systems, from storage. Batteries have a little bit of a problem. They're reaching a rather important thermodynamic limit. So we need to think about different ways of doing that. But there are other ways, through to extraordinary items that we see today. And then we have all the work to do what all engineering products do to optimize, run them better, get them more efficient.
You've been a champion for diversity, inclusion, and equity, and for better or worse, there's a lot of dudes in this room. We'd like to have a more diverse industry. What initiatives or incentives can you see? There have been interesting studies proposing, for example, that certain demographics get paid more earlier in their career, or any other creative solutions. Do you see anything being discussed now that you think is a truly innovative solution to having more diverse workplace, as opposed to just
repeat why this is so important, other than the fact is that it's right and it reflects a human right of everybody to be treated absolutely equally. But it's about avoiding bias in everything that we make or think about. And every time I go and see people, they worry desperately about this. Certainly, I mean, as we know, in Silicon Valley, it's still quite a lot of men around doing men things, and built-in bias is really, really bad. And secondly, it's about inclusion, which when you lead a company, you know very well that if you get inclusion wrong, people don't think they're members of a team. And when they're not members of a team, they're not engaged, and they just don't work well. The more obvious points are that you deny yourself access to a very large number of people if you don't get the proper approach to including people into an organization, institution, or society. I have no new techniques except this. It seems to me that it's always inappropriate for anyone to have a list of candidates for a job that is not fully inclusive and diverse. If I ever see that as a chairman of a board, I express with great clarity why I think it's wrong. It really is wrong. And so it's the list of people you examine. And the second thing is the people who are making the selection. They too have to represent what it is you really want to do. And then you can get real merit with diversity through the system, I believe. I'm sure there are other things to do, but I've always found this is the most practical thing. And it's also a litmus test for an organisation, because if people don't do it naturally, you begin to wonder what is it they have in their structure that is biasing the way in which selections are made. The real business of a leader is to build a great team that is going to effectively deliver all the other things that people decide, and do it better than you ever have imagined yourself. I think that's the real skill and the most difficult decision to make. And I look at it for openly gay people, for example. I think everybody knows in the S&P 500 the most famous openly gay CEO is Tim Cook. It took Tim some time to come out. But can anyone think of the next 24 that should be there? The minimum number, I think, of gay people should be around about 5%, maybe 10. But if we have 500, there should be 24 more people. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find them. In fact, I think openly gay, I think the data shows about 3 or 4 in the S&P 500. So my observation is something's going wrong here. Either people are not being selected, there's bigotry, bias, or else they're copying, they're deciding to elect out because they don't like to be exposed, or something else is happening. They're so worried about being like everybody else that they're hiding away, like I did for many, many years. But that was a little while ago. I don't excuse it, but given my background, when I was growing up, if you were gay and you had a sexual relationship, you went to prison. And besides, my late mother, who survived Auschwitz, always told me 2 things: never tell anyone a secret, because they'll use it against you for sure, and secondly, worry about being an identifiable member of a minority, because when the going gets tough, the majority always hurt the minority. We need to change both of those things. But that forced me, or persuaded me, that it was dangerous to be myself until I was outed. So here's what happened. As I decided to go into the closet when I was about 20 and throw away the key and stay there forever, gave you the reasons. And I did that, and I thought it was quite good fun to run 2 lives. It was a bit like being a spy, the fiction and the reality and keeping them separate. It was great until I got to a point where I got to be very well known. So more people knew who I was than I knew who they were. And so danger rose. So I decided to go even further into the closet. And I ended up actually building a relationship with a gay escort. That was a bad decision. And then it was really a bad error of judgment. And then secondly, he left and I thought nothing of it. And the next thing I got was a phone call from a tabloid newspaper who said, well, we've just bought a story about your personal life from your former boyfriend. Here are 39 questions. Do you have any comments? So the questions were horrendous. So I said no, but I got hold of a lawyer and said, we've got to bottle this up. And I used what I think is commonly called a saber-toothed lawyer, someone really, really bad. They're very nice and very qualified, but as long as you're the client. And this all worked badly because when asked by this lawyer I'd never met before, how did you meet this guy? I didn't tell the truth in a witness statement. Unfortunately, it wasn't on the stand, it wasn't perjury, but it was a second bad error of judgment. So all this went on and eventually went through various appeals. In fact, I created a brand new piece of law in the Supreme Court, which was very comforting for my lawyers, not so good for me, and I lost on this basis, and I was outed. And at that point I realized that I had a model of the world in my head which said the most important thing is to be like everybody else. And I suddenly wasn't. And I thought the world would actually collapse, that nobody would like me, nobody would do business with me, and I wouldn't be able to go to any country in the world because I might be excluded on the basis of my sexuality. So I was a global press star for 3 days, literally all over the world. And on the day 4, of course, it stopped. The paparazzi didn't follow me on motorbikes anymore. And so I went out to shop. I had to do that. And I started being stopped in the street by people who kept saying, "We're right behind you," and I didn't know who these people were. And then I started getting a mailbag. I got a huge mailbag where I realized that my assumptions were all wrong. And actually, people like people who are actually themselves. And it kind of works out fine. But it was one of the most extraordinary moments in my life, and I decided at that point, and certainly I resigned from BP because I didn't want BP to go through this. I think it was not appropriate to be there. Probably it was convenient for the board of directors for me to go, because it's never good to have a too controversial CEO. And I actually resigned from everything I was doing, which gave me a very interesting, rather chilling moment after having been very busy for over 40 years with nothing to do. And that was actually a very good thing, because I figured out later, about a month, that I wasn't going to retire, and something else happened, and the rest is history. So it was an odd moment, to put it in a very British way, but it was a very important moment, and I think it does demonstrate that tough stuff which happens to people changes them, changes direction, and it usually works out okay. Not always, but it usually does.
So this book in particular is very positive. I consider it kind of a history of problem solving. That said, the problems that we're said to be facing right now are potentially multiple extinction level risks. I'm not always sure if I believe that. Some days I do, some days I don't. But as an engineer and a student of the ingenuity of humans in history, how do you feel about the scale of problems we're facing as a civilization today, and any favorites?
To my mind, first of all, I'm a kind of born optimist. I think I'm a clear-eyed optimist. I believe that engineering and business are there to provide solutions, not to sit around wringing hands and saying that the end is nigh. I don't think that's our role, and I don't think it's the role of anyone in this room. However, I think there are two really big unintended consequences, and they weren't intended when things started, but they were unintended outcomes of great progress. And they are around probably and looking at the world saying, maybe we can end this world for you if you don't play your cards properly. And one is obviously in the biomedical field. It's antimicrobial resistance. The advent of antibiotics, of course, has saved a huge number of lives, brought to us by the advent of penicillin, which incidentally might have been discovered by the 3 Nobel laureates who got the Nobel Prize for it, but actually was made by an extraordinary chemical engineer called Margaret Hutchinson. She was living in the Midwest, and a completely unsung hero who made an impossible and unstable product into 650 billion units, which saved a lot of lives during the Second World War. So, but I think the problem here is it is an existential threat. We don't know which of these particular virulent organisms will come and kill us. There are 19 at the moment, and every year the number expands. And while you could eventually engineer an antibiotic for one of them, by the time you got that done, a lot of people would die, and maybe an enormous number of people would die. So that's threat one. And threat two in my book is, of course, climate change. It's really very simple. If we don't do anything about it, we're going to heat the world up quite significantly. At our present course, I think, depending on how pessimistic you look at, how pessimistic the forecasters are, and what they take into account, anywhere between 3 and 6 degrees, which would rather quite dramatically change the world around us. It is a matter of engineering which we have. It's engineering products and solutions that can get better if they're rolled out at scale and quickly, but they need a change in public policy to make that possible. Economic signals really matter. And secondly, replacing all the growth in energy demand, not by hydrocarbons, but by new forms of energy, all of which is very possible.
AI and nuclear war are not high on that list.
No, I don't think so. I think nuclear war, I think we've got a very comfortable, mutually assured destruction equilibrium. It's a stable equilibrium, but I think so far, so good. I put it as a lower threat. I'm not with the people in the Pugwash conference who believe it will eliminate the world. There are other, of course, threats from different forms of weapons, but every time there's a threat, I think we are engineering a solution to them. Drones have been a big problem, especially around airfields. I know that in the UK, we've had plenty of people who want to disturb what goes on in the UK flight patterns. They're very dangerous things, but they can be disarmed very easily by changing the signaling to them. And if push comes to shove, you can get them out of the air with a laser. So you can actually sort that out. I think AI is mostly, I would say, if it is a threat, it's a very long-term threat. I think the biggest threat is for us to really buy all the hype and take it very seriously. I think there's an awful lot of exaggeration in this area, in particular on its threat. I think there are some much bigger social threats to do with computation and privacy and connectivity that I think many people are aware of in this room that we have to handle in advance of that.
We could go all day, but I know we've got more companies to present, and you have a speech to give at the Natural History Museum downtown. So thank you very much for taking some time with us and being a great supporter of Blue Bear and our companies over the last few years, and look forward to continuing the discussion.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.